Work through our material on out of Jeff Smith's book, Wisdom Calls, and we're using, basically I'm breaking that book. He wrote a whole book, and some of you I think actually have picked up copies of that. You can go to Amazon, if you buy books on Amazon, you can go to Amazon and look up Wisdom Calls. Bill's got a copy of it here in his hands. There's a whole book that Jeff did, and I reached out to him, and I offered to just buy books for everybody, and he said, no, I'll give you a PDF that I can break down and find a way to use. And so I appreciated his willingness to give us a in-house kind of license, if you will, to be able to print segments of his material that we're working through. And so we've been doing this, giving you basically something to look at every day in terms of your study, and then we come in on Sundays and talk about the week's readings. And when you leave today, the December's is back there, so you can grab it. It'll be sitting back there on the table. You can grab next month's readings on your way out of the building. But the first reading that we had for this past week came out of Proverb 12, verse 15, but it basically talks about what? Fool. All right, and what about the fool? Yeah, the fool looks good to himself, right? Everything's hunky-dory to the guy that's foolish sometimes. Did I just say the word hunky-dory in a Bible class? Yes, I just did. But anyway, but right, everything's just fine. And the problem is everything may not be fine, and there may be things that he needs to consider. And every choice he makes, right, every decision that he makes is wise in his own eyes. And it's kind of hard to encourage somebody like that. It's kind of hard to help somebody like that or teach somebody who is convinced that no matter what they say, do, or think, that it's perfectly fine. Jeff used an interesting illustration if you were reading through the material. He talks about the idea of how though you may want to, at times, look at your child and go, that was foolish, but maybe not a wise thing to do, but we've seen it, right? You know, he mentions the idea of somebody sets a drink close to the edge of the table, and you tell that child that you might want to push that back, and 2 seconds later it hits the floor. Or the inevitable moment where somebody leaves the house without a coat because 40 degrees doesn't need a coat, and then they're outside for 30 minutes and realize, well, I should have gotten a coat, but too stubborn maybe to admit that and to do anything about it. Foolish decisions that people make. And sometimes the challenge is that when we make foolish decisions, we're unwilling to try to even change course. We're unwilling to try to even make the corrections that sometimes really ought to be made. I want to jump you to technically Monday's segment of this conversation where he gets finally into the text. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but he who heeds counsel is what? Wise. Who needs counsel? Everybody. And how often? Yeah, a lot more than we admit, right? A lot more sometimes than we admit to. The foolish one will never see the need for counsel because he's wise in his own eyes. Why would I need to seek wisdom from somebody else? Because I'm already the smartest person I know. And so why would I seek help, thoughts, information from somebody else? The wise person will recognize that they're in need for counsel and instruction and guidance, and their eyes and their ears will be what? Will be open, right? And a willingness to listen to the things that are being shared with them. Just because I decide it's right doesn't make it right. And just because I decide that it's the path that ought to be taken, just because I choose that it ought to be the way that I should go, doesn't necessarily make it to be true. Sometimes I need to push the pause button and gain the counsel that's around me. I can remember when I was a young preacher, long time ago, but I can remember sitting, and we don't do it nearly as much, maybe, and that's my fault because I've become now the older preacher, and I should maybe see too that this happens more often. But anyway, but we used to get together with preachers a lot. We would sit down and have breakfast together and talk about things, and I always found it fascinating that sometimes we as the younger men in that setting, and not that younger men didn't have anything to contribute to the conversation, but there were probably a lot of times where the younger guy should have been quiet and listened. Now, again, I'm not saying they don't have anything to contribute, but sometimes there was a wealth of wisdom with years of experience sitting in front of us, but we never gained any of that wisdom or counsel because we were too busy being wise in our own eyes. We were too busy being wise in our own eyes. And again, I'm not trying to criticize in that sense. I'm just trying to say there are probably moments like that for all of us, where the better path would have been to be quiet and listen, rather than just keep on pressing and pushing my own thoughts and my own ideas about something, and never appreciating the fact that there could be a wealth of wisdom right in front of me if I would just slow down and listen to what they have to say. The bigger challenge in relationship to this is that this foolish one who sees himself as always the smartest in the room doesn't want to listen to who either? God, right? He doesn't want to listen to God either, right? He's convinced that he's got it all together himself. Why would he need to even listen to God? Because he's got all the right answers, all the right paths, all the right choices. Everything's fine. And I think that's a caution that all of us need to accept. Jeff writes this in that paragraph. This truism, mine's a little bigger just so you can see it on the screen, but all of this is in your notes. This truism touches on nearly every aspect of life and is an obvious symptom of a heart too proud to admit wrong, accept advice, handle chastening, or learn better. Yeah, he's right. He's right.
That's a big word.
Yeah. And it becomes a lot about self and our own thoughts. But sometimes we don't want to admit the path or a decision or a choice or something else is a better way to do it, because then I have to admit what? Yeah, that maybe I was wrong in the choices that I made. And maybe if I can get past that barrier, sometimes maybe I just need to rethink about that. Maybe it isn't even a matter of I was wrong. Maybe it's just a matter of this was what? This would have been better. This choice would have been better. This decision would have been better for me. But if I put barriers and walls and things up all the time to counsel and instruction that comes, then it's going to be hard for me to embrace any of that. Go ahead, Bob.
Probably one of the hardest things to do is to know who you want to listen to.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to religion, you don't have that problem.
Right.
But when it comes to everyday knowledge that you might want to accept or reject, you better do some study on who you want to listen to.
Yeah. And I mean, you're right, Bob. If you couldn't hear what Bob was saying, I think it's an important aspect for us to appreciate. We want to be careful. We know that God's wisdom is superior to all, and so that's the first step in seeking guidance and help and counsel. But when we're seeking additional help from others, we better be wise in that choice. And sometimes what happens when I want to be wise in my own eyes, I'll just simply find somebody who will counsel me that'll tell me what? Yeah, what I want to hear or what I've already decided. Right? It's okay to seek out somebody who sees something differently and has maybe a different mindset about it, because maybe they may be able to provide some insight that I've never considered, a thought, a direction that I've never even entertained. And so I think it's important for us to be careful, but also not pick and choose from the idea of only going to talk to people that are going to agree with me, because that's a mistake in that process as well. And sometimes maybe we could seek counsel. Notice he mentions that sometimes it's good for us to submit to the advice of someone who has already walked the same regrettable path, or who can more objectively and clearly see its end. There may be people that we know who have made themselves some poor choices and decisions in life, and they might have some advice or help or counsel if I'll listen to it. that they have a perspective on that I might not have on my own. Again, wisdom in choosing who it is that we seek thoughts or information from. Yes, go ahead.
I also feel that even if someone maybe says something to you and maybe they have malice in their heart, or they're saying something and it's upsetting to you because maybe they didn't say it in the kindest way, that doesn't mean we should disregard it. We should still reflect upon it. And if it doesn't apply, if you seek counsel and you truly believe that that's, what they said was not correct, you can still ponder and reflect on it.
Yeah. And I think that's a good thought, Doris, that sometimes truth comes to us from a variety of kinds of sources. And some of those sources are well-meaning. Some of those sources may have malice or ill intent behind why they're telling me this truth. But if it's true none the same. And I think that we do have to be careful that we don't read the intent or the heart or the condition of the speaker, the advisor, first, and then decide whether I'm going to listen or not. No, listen to, is it true or not? And then maybe a better approach might have been more encouraging to help me. But if it's true, it still ought to be contemplated and considered and appreciated just from the truth standpoint. But I do think you're right. I think sometimes we very quickly write people off because they didn't say it in a nice way, or they approached me in a bad moment, or they whatever, right? Their disposition about it wasn't what you thought they should have had, and now all of a sudden I'm rejecting truth based on somebody else's attitude. And by the way, we've all done that. I shouldn't accuse you guys, I'm sorry, but I have. I've done that, where somebody has said something in a way that wasn't necessarily the most appealing way I would like to have heard it, and all I could think about was they were mean to me, and not necessarily the truth that they may have been saying.
Like the people in Berea, they checked the scriptures to see what the truth is talking about.
You add Proverb 10:23, O Lord, I know the way of man is not in himself. It is not in man who walks to direct his own steps. And then the conclusion, sometimes we stop there. O Lord, what? Correct me. Correct me. It's not in me to choose my own path and steps and to correct me. Correct me when those moments occur. And there are lots of biblical examples of that we could see in Scripture. Thoughts or questions about that? I need to move to the next piece of the study. All right, so go to Tuesday's reading, which was out of Proverbs 12:22, where he simply said, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord. Wisdom called, but I had my son tell her I wasn't at home. That was an interesting way Jeff put that. Right? I'm not home. I don't have time for this. And I'm careful with some of that, right? Because are children ready for every ounce of truth that there is in the world? No, they're not. And is it necessarily lying to guard children and protect them from some information and truths that they're just not prepared to handle? I don't sit around at the Thanksgiving children's table and talk about the Israel and Gaza situation, right? You find something that's more appropriate. It doesn't make that situation any less true, and it doesn't make it any less something that's important, but we may want to use some caution as to what choices we make. But yet we also do need to be careful, though, that we don't find ourselves blurring the lines between deciding, well, a child's not ready for that information yet, and just flat out lying and being deceitful about that. Because children's habits are learned when? Early. They're learned early when they're children. And sometimes those molds are hard to break, and they're watching, and they're listening, and they're reacting. And he talks there about what we often call those little white lies, those harmless exaggerations. And I find myself sometimes when my kids would hear me tell some story about some situation or that I found myself in, they'll say to me, "Dad, did that really happen? Did it really happen that way?" And my only response I can give is, as far as I know, right? As far as I remember, that's the way it happened. But we can get caught up sometimes, and exaggerations and untruths that could potentially down the road lead to some issues. He mentioned even someone else is padding the resume, right? We've had political situations over the years where people have assumed nobody was going to read the resume. Nobody was actually going to vet this. And they listed all kinds of educational background and work backgrounds and career backgrounds, and they didn't do any of those things. And when vetted, they were caught in that. Didn't seem to have any effect on the political side, But anyway, that's a political statement. I'll leave that for another time. But those kinds of things can generate a level of distruth. Who's the father of lies? The devil is. Why? I don't want to do anything to do with him, right? That should be my mindset. I don't want anything to do with Satan. And if he's the father of lies, then I certainly want to avoid, stay away from anything that might be related to things that are dishonest or untrue. And we have to take that cautiously. And we kind of appreciate him being the father of lies because he told the first lie that we what? Yeah, that's in the Bible, that man ever heard. The first lie ever told was, thou shalt not surely die. The very first lie. He's the father of lies, not from just kind of some generic mindset. No, he's the father of lies because he was the genesis of lies. He told the first one that man ever heard. When God told man, if you eat of that fruit from that tree that's in the midst of the garden, thou shalt surely die. And Satan just comes and says, no, you won't, and begins the process of lies and deceits that have carried through from that point forward. I want you to notice that paragraph that Jeff writes when he says, on almost every occasion, we lie for what purpose? Selfish reasons. Lies generally come out of selfish purposes. I don't want somebody to know the truth. It'll advantage me in some way. It's going to help my situation. So they usually come in the form of selfish reasons. To take advantage, to cheat, to steal, like that price swapping situation I spoke to you about in the sermon this morning. Those are the reasons why people will lie. But I think that last one sometimes is probably the biggest. To avoid what? Responsibility. I don't want to admit that I'm responsible for that. I'll tell you a quick story. Humor me if I've told you this before, but some of you will remember that we're in the band in my era that used to go to middle school down Tyler County, right? Had the old middle school. But we didn't have band room big enough for the middle school band down there, so you would get on a bus, and you'd ride that bus from the middle school up to the high school band room at the end of the day, and that's where we had our full band rehearsal. And so at the end of every day, the band, again, was still too big for one bus, and so they ran two buses. It was the same bus, though. It ran a group of students up to the high school real quick, circled back around, went back down the other end of town, picked up the rest of the kids and brought them up to the high school. 6th graders had to ride the first bus. 8th graders had to ride the second bus. 7th graders could jump on whichever one they wanted. Well, there was a group of guys that decided that they would jump on the first bus, hide in the seats, ride it back down to the middle school, and then get back, stay on it, then ride it back up to the high school, just goofing around. Never did that, ever did it, never did it, knew I would get in trouble if I did it, chose not to do it until one day I did. And that was the day the bus driver had it. And she came back and she ran all of us out that were on the bus. Of course, it didn't help that a bunch of 8th graders got on the bus going, I wonder who's back here today. I wonder who's back here today. But anyway, that's another story. But I can remember not wanting to be responsible for that because it wasn't about what the school was going to do to me. It was about having to explain that to Warren Lee when I got home. And I can remember trying to sneak back on that bus. I can remember trying to find a path, some way to try to figure out, can I sneak back on this bus where maybe they won't realize that I was hiding on that bus with all those other guys, because that was the only time I'd ever done it. Surely they won't remember me if all those guys have been involved in that. Why? Because I didn't want to be responsible. Now, it didn't work, by the way. It didn't work. But that's kind of what happens, right? When we don't want to be held responsible, when we don't want to be accountable for the choice or decision that we make, we'll try to do anything we can sometimes. We'll lie, we'll be deceitful. And as a parent, sometimes it's hard to admit that I might have been planting the seeds for my own children by saying, tell them I'm not here. I don't want to be responsible to take that phone call right now. I don't want to talk to that person at the door right now. Tell them I'm not here. And then we wonder why the child, when their need to be held responsible, says, tell them I wasn't on the bus. Right? Again, it all kind of works hand in hand, and we've got to be careful that lying doesn't become a pattern. Number one, for me personally, because of the consequences of that, but also the influence and the challenges I could bring to others if they're following that lead. Notice he also mentions sometimes things like, well, maybe we don't want to, not just a responsibility because I'm going to get in trouble, but maybe we don't want to pay everything we should pay. And so we find ways to be deceitful. Notice he said, lies are sometimes told to protect oneself from excessive injury. We tell them to the Internal Revenue Service, the draft board, wives packing rolling pins, and the policeman who just might be dumb enough to believe that my speedometer is more accurate than his radar. Right? We do that a lot. I don't want to pay the price. I don't want to own up to all the excess that I think might be around. And again, we find ourselves trying to be deceitful. Thoughts or comments about that? I'll give you a chance. Let's move to that last section then. Thursday and Friday's readings. Proverbs 12, verse 25, and talks about the idea of anxiety in the heart and the depression, the issues, and the things that it creates. Jeff uses a question in the beginning of that when you were reading through that. He says, what's the good word? He says, we use that expression from time to time, often without much thought, but sometimes when hoping for some positive news, almost ordering the bad news away or inviting the hearer to recast his message in the most advantageous terms. What's the good word, right? At the end of the day, we like to hear good things, I would hope. We like to hear positive things. We like to be encouraged. And so sometimes we even plant the seed in hopes that will be the response. But notice he said, wisdom suggests that the good word is one that allays the anxiety of a person who might otherwise allow his cares to become obsessions, his outlook to become pessimistic, and his spirit to become depressed. Pessimism and anxiety, I believe, run hand in hand. They run hand in hand. If I view everything as a problem, then what will everything feel like? It's a problem. It's a problem. If you want to witness that, come load the band trailer with me. And you'll watch me transform into pessimism. Because it's always a hassle, right? It's always a problem. Somebody's not ready yet. I got to wait to put that card in. I can't put that one in until that one's full, and that one's not full because there's 3 students that haven't showed up on time, and I'm just... Deborah's being so good right now. But she'll remind me, you're just adding stress to yourself. It ain't worth it. Why? Why be so? Just wait. Be patient. But you and I probably all have something like that. Maybe it's not a band trailer for you, but maybe it's something else. Maybe it's having to go to a store. Maybe it's whatever. Maybe it's just something in life that is of necessity that has to be done. But before we ever get there, we're already pessimistic about it. Maybe it was Thanksgiving Day. And we were already pessimistic about it. And then we wondered why it was stressful and anxious and worrisome and problematic. Proverb writer in the English Standard Version said, anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good word makes him glad. Sometimes all people need to hear is something positive from you or I. All they may need in that moment is just somebody to change the atmosphere. Somebody to change the thought processes in that situation. And we're not all always ready to receive it in the moment. There are lots of times when I'm trying to put all that stuff in that trailer that I'm hearing the good. It just takes me a few minutes to let it sink in. But hopefully we do, right? Hopefully we let that, maybe in the exact moment we may not be just immediately turning our mindset around, but hopefully the good we're hearing will begin to change our thinking about the environments and concerns and situations that we find ourselves in. It doesn't mean that the concerns aren't real. It doesn't mean the concerns aren't part of serious things. When the Apostle Paul listed all the challenges and difficulties that he was experiencing, and he talks about how that he was in trouble when he went to the wilderness, and he was trouble in the city, and he was trouble when he was on a boat, and he was in trouble when he was on the land, and he listed all these difficulties that he experienced, and at the end of it all, and he said, besides all this, the heaviness of the churches, the actual work he was trying to do. And I think all of us can find ourselves sometimes being so overwhelmed by the heavy stuff that we forget that there is a Savior who can lead us and encourage us and who provides for us the good word continually. He notes that the command of Jesus is simple and its logic is reasonable and obvious. Therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life. Which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? Again, what I love about that phrase is it doesn't say that the problem isn't real. It doesn't trivialize what you may be going through in life. What it says is that worrying about it can't what? Can't change it. That's what he's saying. He's not saying that this isn't serious. Right? Your health concerns you may have about yourself or a loved one, they may be serious. You may have job issues that are serious. There may be situations that you find yourself in that are real and serious things. He's not diminishing and saying, oh, if you really love Jesus, all those things just go away. That's not what he said at all. What he said was, worrying can't change it. And if I'm interested in changing it, I've got to do that differently than just adding anxiety and worry on top of it. And I think that's the messaging that we've got to begin to understand. Because I've seen it. I've seen Christians become discouraged because they're dealing with a real life issue, and a well-meaning brother or sister in Christ will come to them and say, you shouldn't worry about that. You shouldn't be concerned about that. If you had any amount of faith, you wouldn't even be thinking about that. Where's the good word, right? Where's the good word that might have actually encouraged me in that? I think that's the part we've got to grasp. The good word is an encouraging thought, statement, help, aid, and to encourage somebody to realize, I can't erase this situation for you. I understand how problematic it is, but if we can find a path past the worry, then maybe we can find real resolve and answer. That's the point I believe Jesus is trying to make. The worry won't help it. So let's find a better word. Let's find a better path. Let's make better choices to be able to make that work. He makes this statement, worry is powerless. It's powerless to do anything positive anyway. Its power is only found in what? In negative things. Worry can only have a negative impact on any situation you find yourself in. It can only have a negative impact. It's powerless to be of any help or aid within the process. And if I'm really looking for help, then I've got to be cautious about that. Notice he references the book of James. He said, James begins his New Testament book by asserting that the very things we worry about can have the effect of strengthening our patience and completing our faith, but not if we ruin the affair with worry and doubt. Some of the things are real, they're challenging, but if all I'm doing is worrying about them, then I can't get any benefit. But if I'll work towards resolve and answer and aid and help that comes from God, then maybe I can turn that situation around a little bit. If nothing else, at least perfect the patience that is within me. For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea driven and tossed by the wind. For let not that man suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Worry actually affects my ability to communicate properly with the Lord. I think that's the implication there. That the worry and the anxiety and all of that is actually becoming a barrier to real positive, open prayer and conversation with the Lord. Just ask yourself this question. I'm not asking you to answer out loud, obviously. But have you ever found, and maybe not, but have you ever found your prayers feeling and sounding like a complaint session? I'm just asking. Have you ever found your prayers feel almost like a complaint session? Now, again, I'm not saying there aren't things that we need to be asking God. Don't overstate what I'm saying. But I do think we've got to be careful. If all that God is hearing from us is the worrying and the anxieties and all that kind of build-up frustration, then how's he really going to be able to help me? Because all I'm not focused on answers. I'm not focused on strength and encouragement. I'm just focused on everything that's troublesome to me. When there's a God ready to give a peace that passeth all understanding. But I'm not looking for it because all I'm interested in the moment is listing my grievances. And that can be a detriment to us. Your thoughts or questions? Go ahead.
God answer them kind of prayers.
He said he won't listen to a double-minded man here. So we'll take James at his word as it relates to that. Any other questions, thoughts you might have had?
We can change things, and sometimes we just have to go to God and leave it there.
Yeah. I think sometimes, Pam, you're right. I think sometimes what we want is answer and resolve, right? That's generally what we always want. But sometimes the only thing available in that moment, because there may be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 other people, and they've got to choose to do what's right to really find the ultimate result. Maybe what I need to be asking, Lord, we may not be able to fix this, but can you give me patience? Can you perfect patience in me to carry me through the realities of this challenge?
You expect God to do it right now.
And sometimes that creates difficulty. Good.
Sometimes it's also helpful to write down what you want to say and maybe have a part of your prayer be praising Him or thanking Him first, and then giving your problems to Him. Sometimes when things are, we had some friends that lost a little 5-year-old daughter this summer. That's all our prayers were just for Him to do His will, and so it didn't turn out the way they wanted, but it was still a good thing, and good things came out of it. But I think maybe almost if you can think about and categorize your prayers, if you will, that might be helpful to keep us focused so that it's not just all about what we want.
It's not direct topic, but it's germane to the conversation. I think sometimes we convince ourselves that if I write down what I'm praying, it's not heartfelt. And that's not true. Sometimes maybe the prayer is better worded and my heart gets expressed in better ways because I took the time to pen the thought and to write down the concern. And it may actually help me formulate it in a more positive, beneficial way because I actually paused and took the time. So I'm not saying you have to do that. Don't leave today going, Brian said you got to write down every prayer. You can't pray it. That's not what I said. What I said was it can be helpful. And it's not wrong to take the time to write the thought because that can actually lead to benefit. And even in those situations, a relative of mine one time advised me, said sometimes with people who are struggling with things that they wish they had said but can't go back and erase and situations change, he said he always advised me to tell them, write it down. And it's amazing sometimes what just writing it down can help you move beyond it. And so it's a good tool. Any last minute thoughts before we close in prayer? I appreciate all that. Again, I'll set those lesson sheets for December out there in the back so you can grab them on your way. Let's bow our heads together in prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you. You bless us, you strengthen us. The Proverbs are so full of wisdom. Wisdom calls for us to honor your word, to appreciate your counsel. Give us a heart that's receptive to all the things that you guide us in and lead us in. And thank you for the encouragement that it provides. And we know that life can be challenging and difficult things occur, but we know that with you we can be perfected in our patience and that we can endure and face those difficulties. Love us and care for us as we leave today. Strengthen us in all that's right and good in your eyes. And we pray this through Jesus' name. Amen.